I need some traction.
So again, my name's Michelle Huff. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for UserTesting. And I run at UserTesting the market strategy as well as product management functions and a lot of the functions that build brand, demand, and customer marketing. I've worked on product teams at big companies, Salesforce and in Oracle, and small companies as well. And one of the things over the years that I've always heard about and tried to do is really listen to customers, right? You hear it so often, you gotta make sure you get out of the office, talk to customers, and kind of bring that into the product. And so for this session, I thought, hey, why don't we actually go through what we actually do within user testing to bring customer feedback into the products we build. We actually built a product around customer feedback that's called Product Insight. And my hope is that out of this talk, there's a few things that you'll get out of it. One of it is planning to dive into a little bit of the tactics, right? So actual things that we use to build what we call a shared understanding of the customer. And then two is really providing kind of framework on how to get buy-in around kind of your vision and around this shared understanding. And the third is how do we do it fast, right? Because ultimately we're trying to make sure that we build products, take it to the market quickly. And so I want to talk through some of the strategies that we do that too. So why does this matter, right? Why are we even talking about this? And we think ultimately, right, as product managers, the idea of time to customer value is super critical, right? Because you're trying to always manage the how do we get to market quickly, right? So we can start generating revenue. But then how do I make sure that customers actually find what I put out there valuable, right? It's that ultimate tension. And I wholeheartedly believe that really building this shared understanding is one of the approaches that you use to get to here. Additionally, this tends to be one of the things that people sometimes forget about the most, and it's really this alignment around your vision and around this customer value. And a part of this is that my VP of Product Management has this great mantra she's always instilling with the team. And a part of that is your product is not just the pixels, right, that you bring to the screen. If you're developing software, it's not just the tangible thing. It's also how it's marketed, it's how it's sold, and how it's supported, right? And so all those people who are really representing this product experience, and so they need to get aligned and bought into ultimately what you're trying to build and the customer and their problem set. And then the third is probably what I think everyone loves the most is all the back and forth, the second guessing, the religious wars around, should something be blue versus green? I don't know if you've heard the term hippos, the highest paid person's opinion, right? So much about the role is that you're weighing all these different insights and options and you're trying to prioritize, and people come to the table with a lot of opinions. And so a part of really making sure it's grounded in customer input and customer in the broad sense, not just existing, but prospective customers, the market you're trying to go into, is really one of the ways that really helps this. So a little bit into our story, our venture. So how this all began, actually I started about a year ago, but we got a new CEO before then. And for user testing, I don't know how many of you know about user testing, but it's really been a company that's been around for 10 years. Our roots have been grounded and really grown with a lot of UX research and design. And so we have a huge customer base of people who've used it specifically for testing usability and a lot of different types of use cases. And one of the things that when coming in, we were taking a look and saying, hey, let's better understand our current customer base, let's look at the market. And what the CEO wanted to do is we observed that we had about 15 to 20% of our customer base that were already product teams, they were product managers. And so we wanted to make, as a company, a strategic bet and really bring in a new audience. And so I'm sure many people have done this, right? You're encountering something brand new as the company, something that's really important. And one of the things that we're trying to then do is, okay, what if we actually built a product experience just for them and their problem set? So what the team really did is said, okay, even though this is something that the CEO is kind of wanting to drive, let's actually validate that the market's actually there. And then let's go through and make sure we truly understand the problems we're wanting to solve and then propose a solution if the market exists. So how we went about doing that is first, as mentioned, kind of building this shared understanding of the customer. So how we did that, one, if we kind of take a step back and think about it from a product perspective, I like to think about, what's this customer understanding? Like, what is it? And it really boils down to three questions. And the first is, right, who is the customer? It might seem simple, but oftentimes it can be a lot harder than that to identify either the behaviors or the titles or the roles that really make that customer. And then ultimately, right, what are their problems? I've heard oftentimes, right, product managers, we need to not fall in love with the solution, but fall in love with the problems. I think Shauna took the talk of empathy, right, and really making sure you really understand the problems that people are trying to solve. And then the third is, okay, now that we know that, essentially, right, we're trying to build what's the lightest weight, best solution that we can do to solve that problem. And so this is kind of the three major questions we kind of think through. And then as mentioned, when we're building this shared understanding, alignment is huge, and it's one of the things that people forget about quite frequently, is that this kind of shows a framework that we use internally, but a big part of it is, okay, as you're continuing to learn, how do you get your core cross-functional team and then essentially start working and radiating out through your executive sponsors, sales and support, the other leaders within the organization, and essentially the whole company kind of really bought into this new product that you're launching. So that's a little bit of the why, and then a little bit of, you know, what should you do? So this is some examples that we used internally of how we started first with our core cross-functional team. So at UserTesting, we have our core team. We work in squads, and so every squad has a designer, product manager, and engineers. But we also like to have a broader squad where we have user research, a data science person, and then product marketing as well. We don't always have a direct one-to-one for every single like staffed squad, but there's always alignment, right? So there's always people who are mapped to these particular core cross-functional teams. So in working through these teams, we always think it's critical to really bring those people in, the whole team, right from the get-go, and to really focus on first, make sure that everyone builds that customer empathy. I like how we ended the last session with empathy. We'll talk about it again, but I wholeheartedly believe, right, it's when you can actually start seeing how people are using solutions, watching them go through certain problems, hearing the words, understanding their pain, right? It's all that over time, you start almost building this intuition. You start seeing patterns across all the different people that you talk to. And we think it's super critical to make sure that whole working cross-functional team has a way to get exposed, and it's also building that pattern. I mean, there's even some people that I've talked to today where there used to be a point in time where you just delegated one person, right? They're the one who's actually going to go, they're going to research, and they'll come back. We've just found it so much more effective when everyone on the team has some exposure, right? Because ultimately, you know, if everyone's building something and they understand the problem, it can be that much more effective. But, you know, we've tried a lot of different approaches to make sure that it's efficient with people's time, right? You don't want you can't have every single person spend equal amount of time on different things, but how do you make sure that if there's certain conversations that people are having, if there's data that we've seen, that we're constantly sharing them across the team. And so particularly the product managers take a lot of time working with the different people, whether it be different communication channels, even just setting up all the interviews and having people kind of watch them or watch the recordings or have people take notes or take highlight reels, like little clips about things so that maybe you don't see the whole thing, but you're seeing kind of the important part. And then we also sometimes just get together as teams and literally watch them together. Because it's amazing how when you all have that shared experience, later on as you're designing, you're building, you're going to market, you can refer back to, and everyone knows those same kind of examples. You're not kind of arguing about that. And then again, right, a big part of that is building that shared understanding because essentially, right, it's also just getting the whole team bought in, right? No one wants to build or even market something they don't believe in, they don't think is the right fit. And so really baking this into a part of the process is really effective. So then how do we actually make sure it's efficient? So some of the different techniques that we've used is really making sure that we kind of get to market quickly. In some sense, you can research forever. And when we're asking those three questions, right, I think the challenge in product management, it's not about getting to 100% certainty of who's your customer, who's your problem, what's the lightest weight solution, right? It's about having a hypothesis. Normally you have one, and you're wanting to go through and actually start testing and validating, get some insights and move quickly. And so some approaches we made is literally just being transparent across the team. Very effective to just almost talk through the scenario before you start. So especially new teams coming together, right, for this new product. All these teams had work on various things, but not this particular one. And so they talk through, right? What are some of the key research questions? Like what are some of the ideas that you're actually trying to figure out? What are the different methodologies, right? Are you going to do interviews? Are people going to go and talk to customers in the field or attend certain sales calls or do surveys? Like what's kind of the plan? And then a little bit of alignment around what are some of those success and decision criteria that you're going to use. And then making sure that just habitually the teams constantly, when they learn new things, and sometimes we use a Slack group, so then you're constantly sharing all your different findings, so everyone's kind of hearing and learning about it together. But then really trying to make sure that you stay grounded on it being evidence-based, because over time you're making decisions, and if you can always cite back to specific customer needs, market needs, right, it provides a lot more proof than just your own personal opinion. But what the team really tried to do is time box it. So they all agreed to in advance that what they wanted to do is all these different hypotheses and the testing of it, they were just going to put 1 to 2 weeks max on each one before they move on and made a decision. Because sometimes you can just keep asking and testing because you're just waiting for 100% certainty, and that usually never happens. So it's about how do you start getting more of that as you move forward. All right, so then that's a little bit of, at least for the core team, starting to get everyone aligned. What problems are you trying to solve? A big part of that shared understanding, though, that we believe in is not just the core working team. And this is something, I've learned in my years. I've watched other people go through it the hard way. But in some sense, you can either spend all the time getting alignment and getting people bought in to who the customer is, what the problems you're trying to solve beforehand, or everyone goes away and they're trying to run super fast, and then you come with the big reveal, right? And when you come with the big reveal, you also have to get alignment and get buy-in, and the challenge is it's so much more emotional then, right? Because people have invested time, they've built things, and then when people are questioning, right, it feels like they're questioning your judgments, right? It's just a much harder thing to do. And so one of the frameworks that we've used is really just making sure that along the way, as we're understanding our problems, how do we make sure that we're building in these communication vehicles in all these different ways to get everyone bought into this? And I call it bringing people along on your journey. Because in some sense, right, like if you think about it, as the squads are working, right, you are day in, day out, working through, talking to different customers, learning about the problems, facing, engineering challenges, making trade-offs, right, and all of them are based on, over time, these almost like micro decisions based on learnings along the way. And then suddenly, you get to the point where you're trying to get everyone bought in, and no one's been on that journey with you. In fact, many people, they're not even thinking about it. And suddenly, they're wanting to know like why certain decisions are being made. And so, one thing is, if you don't have one, if you're ever launching anything, I think it's great to have executive sponsors. One of the roles that they can play, a big part of it, is going through and just making sure that once they're bought in, they can really help sell it for you, right? They're in there making sure that the rest of their teams, they're getting other executives bought into the decision, the approach, and the strategies that you're taking. And so really making sure you have one and really leveraging that resource is super critical. And again, it's not the big reveal. It's really as you're deciding, okay, here's actually the problem, the customers that we're going to focus on, right? And then this is the problems that we want to go after. The key is just continually getting them aligned in that journey and makes it super helpful. The next is then sales and support, right? Because ultimately, they're the ones who are representing the product, and so making sure that we brought them along the journey. That way when we're launching it, people were actually really excited that it was coming, and they knew what to expect. And we actually timed it so that they had a lot of time to get ramped up and trained before it went live. And so a lot of them, right, if you kind of get some of the key frontline people, you can have your champions, right? And they get all the rest of the sales organization, the rest of the support organization really bought into the direction that you're going. The third is then ultimately we use is really the other leadership team, because once people start seeing that certain executives, sales and support, the whole field's kind of bought into this, right? It has this great effect, as well as getting the whole team rallied, the whole company rallied around it. What's interesting is, sometimes people always ask, okay, well, when you're spending all this time communicating, it can feel kind of exhausting, right? It's like, oh my gosh, there's so many meetings. I'm trying to actually build stuff, and I'm in all these meetings, like, it's again that you either pay it off before or after, but at some point you got to do it. But there's an approach that you can take. Some people think, okay, when I'm going to these executives or different teams, am I asking permission? Right? And you're not asking for permission, right? When you're leading the product, the idea is that you're sharing your findings. You're bringing them along in the journey to see about, like, here's the things that we're running into, here's the decisions we're making, but making sure you're asserting your point of view. Because I think, especially when I take a perspective now, kind of being in the C-level and working with the product teams, sometimes when people are asking questions, it can feel like, oh, whoa, like, why don't they not trust me? And a part of it is, if you remember, if I'm trying to sell it for you, I'm thinking about all the other people that I'm going to have to sell it to and what objections they might have. And so I'm coming up with all these questions and trying to figure out, like, how thoughtful are you about it? And why are you so convinced that it's this way? And help convince me. And so if people start waffling, backpedaling, that's when you start thinking, oh, maybe it's not fully baked yet. Maybe it's not fully there. So just make sure that you have a strong point of view, but also as you're sharing it, I'm always asking, how does this resonate with your experience? Because again, the product's successful if people can sell it, if they can support it, they can get bought in. And so if they might have some insight that you're not taking into consideration. So all of these are ways to kind of bring this back into your product planning. I think finding the right forum is super important as well. So we had a variety of different techniques and tactics. I'm sure many of you guys use these different ones as well. But I would say for specifically like those initial champions, this is something, it might seem super obvious to some of you. It was something later in my career, it just dawned on me. But like the people, if you can do this like one-on-ones where you're in more in that safe environment so that people can have these objections and you talk through and kind of get aligned before you do something in a broader meeting, it's so much more helpful because you have those few champions who will back you and will support you instead of having it be the first time they've been exposed and then they're asking questions, then everyone's looking, oh, are other people not bought in? It can be kind of challenging. And so, being selective about your approach of when to use the one-on-ones, and then later on thinking about, okay, let's make sure we have executive reviews. We would hop into different team meetings. So all the different sales leadership teams would have ongoing meetings we would jump into to get feedback. And what the team did as well within the company, which was great, is really right when the initiative kind of took off, committed to monthly brown bag sessions for the whole company. I love what I call forcing functions because somehow the time seems to go by if you don't prioritize it. But if you commit to it, put them on the calendar, what you're doing then is making sure that you're always going to be sharing these findings along the way with the company. And then we would always kind of record them for people as well. So that's a little bit of, right, like why would we even do this? And then, what kind of different approaches you can take. And so this next section is a little bit of some examples of how we did it. So, who's your customer and what is your problem? What's their problem? And so one of the things that we always started off first was discovery interviews. And so we lined up a lot of different people, and so some questions, if you haven't done a ton of them, here's kind of an approach we use where we first always like to keep it super open, generic, exploratory. The first set is really more questions around, tell me about your role, since we're more B2B, so it's kind of focused on people's roles versus B2C, and then, goals for the year, your greatest challenges, what keeps you up at night, again, it's so tempting sometimes if you already have ideas to just present the idea, be like, hey, what do you think? And so, if you can start first with more of this exploring, this helps you understand a little about who that person is and like what their problems could be. And then you can start diving into, specifically for us, if it was about feedback, how and when do you get customer feedback? Do you ever do research? Tell me about an experience, right? If you get them to talk about an experience, you can start kind of hearing different things and kind of pull some insight from that. And what made it easy, what made it hard. And then you can, of course, start like diving in a little bit more. Okay, well then what did you actually do? So this is when you start talking solutions. Like what did you actually do? What was something similar? Could you kind of talk through that? And then, we'd say mostly if you try to do these interviews, about 80% of the time is great to do more of the discovery, more open-ended. And then maybe 20% of the time actually getting reactions to solutions. So you can present something and get some early feedback to some sketches or some ideas, and then have that be something that you kind of bring into the building of it. So what we ended up doing, just to even kind of with our customer and problem statement, since it was kind of something brand new for us, we actually did 15 different customer interviews with individual product managers, and we did 25 with product managers. And then we were continually learning and evolving, and then we sent out a survey to 200 product managers. So there's this kind of combination, what you want to do, of the broader kind of surveys as well as more qualitative types of interviews. And so the team's really a firm believer in just making sure we write things down for alignment again. So always having a slide that just really writes out who's our customer, what's the problem that we're trying to solve. So this is kind of our example of product teams. Especially product managers need a way to make faster product decisions based on customer feedback. So that's kind of an example problem statement. We also then wanted to make sure that, again, you had the exploratory types of interviews, and then how do you actually start phasing this out? So we talked through, all these different channels and who to go to, and the team was super deliberate about not doing it all at once, right? So having that first meeting that's really about getting alignment, again, on who's the customer, what's the problem, and then the next time coming back and sharing findings and saying, okay, here's actually some solutions we're exploring and some timelines. Because that's also when you get a lot of feedback, because you might find out, for us, that there's a lot of urgency to make sure we hit the sales kickoff deadline and then something for the first quarter, right? So that determines what features, kind of even what the whole experience looks like. And then for us, only then do we actually show designs, because that then you have this alignment on the timelines, alignment what you're actually trying to solve, instead of first presenting something beautiful. And then people have this tendency, right? They look at it and they start like poking at all these different kind of visual things, when ultimately you're trying to get feedback on those earlier things. And then again, every time you do it, because again, people aren't focused on it all the time, just making sure you have this reminder of reminding people what we talked about last time, right? So here's just a reminder of what we covered, and that provides some context into the next one. This is just an example of what we went through from our one of our example stakeholders, right? We were trying to get alignment. As I'm sure you guys know, product managers have lots of different types of roles. You go to different industries, people do different things, and so we were trying to figure out kind of those different roles, their usage, their pain points, right? So it was all just bringing people on that journey. And then later we showed reactions. One of the techniques that we always like to use is showing little video clips, and so that way you actually, in this whole thing, hear feedback from people and then actually hear things, reactions, and so it's not your opinion, right? You're actually representing the voice of the customer. For the best, lightest solution, what we ended up doing was making sure that we had, we would bring these solution mappings so that you, on the left-hand side, start writing down all the needs, and then the team would come together and brainstorm to just always make sure when you're first coming up with that solution, it's always mapped to a customer needs. It's kind of a framework that we used. And then since we have a very virtual team, we can't always kind of get together in one room and do all the Post-its, and so we used Google Slides and had everyone kind of come together with Post-its, and so we could virtually kind of work on that together, and that helped with prioritization. And then when we tried to get reactions, this is a sample template that we've used as well, where you walk through and say, okay, here's the solution we're proposing. You put in the value proposition, 3 key features, kind of a sentence to describe. And then what we do is actually present it to prospective customers and then ask them, tell me what you think this is. Such a great way, so you can hear in their words if they actually think it's what you think it is. And then we always ask, what do you think is the most compelling and what's the least compelling? And it's such just a nice way to continually do that, and then we iterate and keep building from there. So just to kind of wrap up, ultimately when it comes to solutions, right, there's just some examples. We can share out the slides about the frameworks we use to help determine what the solution is and how it's based on needs, how to better prioritize them based on effort and impact, and then ultimately getting the customer feedback, because even if it's easy to do, it might not be that impactful for the customer, so that continually helps us shape it. And then make sure that you always, when you're sharing it out, right, provide the context, help people explain how you came to that conclusion, like how did you validate that, and then we always try to make sure that we show the solution and show directly how it maps to a need, because it's amazing how many pet kind of features kind of sometimes get baked into there. And then we show designs last. So ultimately, it's about building it fast. The team was really rigorous about building something, and trying to get 1 to 3 weeks to have things stand out. We actually, from idea, I think it was in August when the CEO had us come to that. I think September was when we started researching. October is when we did an alpha. January is when we had our first beta, and we went to market at the end of March. And so, even with all this communication, with all this feedback, we were able to rapidly get out to market, and we've continued to iterate on it ever since. So that's just kind of a quick recap of what we did. Hopefully that was helpful. The two kind of takeaways again, I really think it's important for everyone to build this shared understanding, especially around these 3 items. And then again, which sometimes people kind of forget, but super critical to really get this understanding, not just with the team who builds the product, but really everyone who interacts and represents it. So thank you.
I need some traction. You need some traction. Let's get some traction.